Okay, now for our last session of the day, and we'll make it a short one. I know Erik wanted to. Hi again, Erik. Hi, Kim. Erik wanted to talk about Down syndromes, other forms of developmental disorders, autism, Asperger's, that whole spectrum. The spiritual basis for that.
He says, this is a big one, and he says, Mom, we're seeing more and more of it. I don't know if statistically that's correct, but I'll be anxious to find out. He says we're seeing more and more of like cases of like Down syndrome, of autism, all of these developmentally delayed cases, even them being diagnosed later in life. That he says.
Oh, okay.
The reason why, I guess the reason, maybe the purpose is a little bit different. He's showing, or he says, the reason why one incarnates is to, again, it's the ripple effect that it causes. It's like it's a volunteer basis almost. Coming in with this type of experience brings you to a certain vibration that when you come in contact with these people, it requires you to detach from ego. That's the purpose anyway. That's the intent. So he's talking really fast. He's talking about like two things at once.
Poor Kim. Slow down, rein him in.
Yeah, he's talking about like autism and all forms of autism, and then with Down syndrome and how they look physically, the differences there. So with Down syndrome and the developmental delays, this again is, he says, connected to ego, and it's to teach us about what ego is, what it means. So we'll get to that in a minute. And then he's showing like autism and the developmental delays there. They're different, but they come in, Mom, on the same group. So the same spiritual purpose, different manifestations.
Okay.
The spiritual purpose is to show these people know their self, are very connected to their self. Oftentimes these people don't associate with egotistical or egocentric views.
I can see that. Yeah.
And what he's saying is like, okay, here's an example that Erik is using, like, and he's actually applying this to both. So like Down syndrome or autism, he says, if you were to say, especially to a child, well, even an adult, you better not do that, or here's the consequences. He says those consequences even come from a place of ego. So they don't really even, they can't weigh it out. Like the consequences don't even make sense to them because that's a very egocentric thing to say.
Okay.
And he says, so these people might seem sort of neglectful, or, they neglect to follow the rules, or they don't abide by common standards of what other people do because they don't understand the consequences or they don't relate. He says, why? He says, because that's, again, it can be associated with ego, and these people have no ego.
None, or just a weak ego?
Very, very disconnected from ego.
Okay.
He says. Very intuitively aware, he says.
So what does that teach? What does the child with a developmental delay, what was the spiritual lesson for them?
Spiritual lesson for them, he says, going through this physically is, it seems like a adaptability. Like he's showing like being able to be variable and then adaptable, he says, because they're going to be variable situations, but they have to be adaptable. Sometimes that requires ego, he says. So this can be very difficult for them, if it's going into a classroom setting and it's the first time and they have to adapt, but they're different. He says this is teaching them like self-reliance there's a little bit of ego in there to understand and know self as an individual, he says,
Okay.
but it must be, he's showing me like energetically, this feels extremely difficult. Extremely difficult.
Oh God, I can only imagine. What about for the parents? So, is there a lesson for the parents or others in the family or friends or?
Yeah, he actually kind of laughed when you said that, for the parents, for the teachers, for the family,
Mm.
um, faith, trust. He says these people are going to show you that they're more adaptable than you'll ever give them credit for. With more fear than they do. He
Mm-hmm.
said, like if we have a child going into school with Down syndrome, we anticipate with more fear than they do. They're
Mm.
still very much in the now kind of people, very mindful.
Okay.
Um, and then with autism, he's showing them even being more disconnected from ego,
Mm.
and very spiritually aware, very mindful. So much so that I think at times, depending on the type or the, he says you guys would call it the level of severity of autism, but we would call it like the level of intuition or intuitiveness.
Okay.
These people are often, he's showing like still having one foot or part of their consciousness still very much associated with their spiritual self and
Oh.
not as much with their physical self. So
Mm.
he actually makes me feel like people with autism, no matter what kind, like tangible things, touch, social interaction, even adapting to different places feels foreign. It's
Oh.
very hard to like process mentally because they're so used to their spiritual self.
Ah. Interesting.
Everything is natural, everything just is.
Mm-hmm.
And like here in the physical world, you have to make things happen or there's the physicality behind it, Mom. So he says they often are, it's almost like double processing, like processing from the spiritual understanding and physical. And that,
That's
those two talk,
overwhelming. Oh my gosh.
exactly, those two talking at the same time can be very confusing. So again, he says when you see these people and they don't like act naturally
Mm-hmm.
with common, common social interactions or rules, regulations, if they seem neglectful, it's because they don't quite align with that thought process or that understanding.
Okay. So, what are we to learn? People in their lives. What are they to learn?
This is tough because I couldn't imagine. I have a friend that has a child with Down syndrome, and this is what he shows. You need to step back a little bit, take your hands off the situation, and give a little more faith and trust to.
Oh yeah, we're here to learn faith and trust. Yeah, that's right. Go ahead.
This is because we often, especially in cases like these, he says, I hate to call them out, Mom, but there's even some people that over-identify with this, and poor me, I have a child like blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but again, part of their contract. But he says what they need to do is step back and let the person, the child, adapt. Let them figure out ways to cope. Let them think for themselves, because we often want to jump in and say, this is how you do it. This is, and then again, we forget to let them think for themselves.
Yeah.
He says, trust me, they can think. They're very smart people,
Mm-hmm.
very intuitive, but we often overstep our boundaries, even if we're their parents, he says. We have to
Yeah.
let them experience.
So it's pretty much letting go. That's one of the lessons. Learning to let go and allow the kid to be who he is.
Absolutely. I'm laughing because he got like really close to the camera and he's like put his nose up in the camera.
Oh.
But he says, absolutely. Letting go and letting be.
What about
Be.
humility? I bet because we all expect and hope and expect to have normal children, and when it doesn't happen to you, then there must be a lesson about expectation and or humility. Is it not?
Hey, Mom. He says this is where it goes back to the connection to ego, ego-centric consciousness and awareness. People often will experience, or children will incarnate to somebody who may be very egocentric, to teach them a lesson in humility and have them completely a renewed perspective in life and even of themselves. They might have thought that they were perfect people before, and then all of a sudden they have a child that may have, differences that they're not used to. And now they have to shed that layer and understand their humble self without that ego, that me stuff.
Yeah.
Me stuff.
All right. So it's big lesson in ego and how not to be too attached and too ego heavy. Um, what can we do as far as can't cure it or heal, but what can we do for children with these developmental delays or disorders?
He says, Mom, I think they need more of a voice. Like he's showing even more of a platform because he says, if you think about it, especially anybody that's developmentally delayed, they're very creative thinkers because they have to continually adapt. He says they have to adapt to what's different to them and how it's different to them. They perceive differently. They maybe feel or taste differently. So they become very creative thinkers.
Okay.
So if we gave them more of a voice, he says, could you imagine going in and giving them the opportunity to, to vote or even create programs that they think would be conducive to their growth? Taking some of those ideas to actually build, he says, giving them more of a voice, giving them more trust is going to help the whole situation, everybody involved. Because again, he says, they're creative thinkers. They're going to think outside the box like we wouldn't, because, if we don't have these issues that we have to deal with, we don't have to think outside the box. We understand what our norm is and, where our borders are, our boundaries. But again, they have to continually adapt.
So they have to think outside the box. Well, art therapy seems like it would be a good way for them to find their voice and strengthen their voice.
He says, that's right, Mom, exactly. And with Down syndrome or autism or any other developmentally delayed individuals, let them show you their self. Let them show you what they're good at. Let them show you how they do things instead of making the world accommodate them.
Okay.
Let them show you how they can adapt.
Okay.
Because you're contributing to their growth anyway.
Okay. Any other ways that we can help children that have developmental disorders before we close?
Yeah, he says if you can bring them together, he just says bringing them together and letting them experience other people that are like them is going to be healing for them, because in the physical state of mind, he says, they often can convince themselves that they're the only one like this or the only one with this set of issues. So if you bring them together or even put your child in a group, a meetup group, that's really going to help them see themselves in a new light and understand themselves in a new way. If you can't, he just says, bring them together. He just keeps saying, bring them together.
What about, I guess it's one last thought, equine therapy, or some sort of other animal therapy? Would that help?
He says, I wonder if Erik liked animals, because he goes, Mom, all animals are therapy.
That's true. He loved horses. Yeah, he was a good horseback rider too.
Oh, he says all animals are therapy because they are, he says, they are the embodiment of unconditional love and acceptance. So whether it's a cat, dog, a talking bird, or a horse, he says, he says, remember, these are very emotional beings, not the animals, but the children. And people that are developmentally delayed. They're emotional beings. They rely on their emotions to help them understand. And they can connect very easily with animals that way. So even when they feel like they can't communicate to people or express themselves to people, they still feel that mutual acceptance from an animal. So any kind of animal is going to be very conducive and thoughtful towards help and healing.
Sounds great.
He says it would produce a healing environment. So like if you were a cat or a dog or a guinea pig for your child, it would produce a healing environment.
That sounds great. Maybe not a goldfish. I don't know.
He says it takes the touch too, Mom.
It
So,
takes a touch. Right. Okay. I remember when Erik was little, he found a little minnow that had jumped off onto the dock, and he carried it around with him all the time. Said, "My little pet." It was dead, you know. It's like
oh,
he just walked around with that thing for several hours. It's like,
oh, that's
anyway.
so silly but sweet.
All right. I love you, Erik. Love you, Kim. Thank you for this.
Back. Erik says, "I love you, Mom."
Bye. Bye, everybody. Thank you for watching. Oh, Kim, do you want to say anything about anything upcoming? I forgot.
Sure, we sure can. We have, as a lot of you guys know, we have Chicago coming up here in just a few days, actually. Sedona is going to be in October. I know some of you guys had some questions about the dates. So the 19th through the 22nd, we will see you guys in Sedona. We're going to do a group hike, hopefully a group meditation too, up on Cathedral Rock. It's a really easy spot to get to. So check out the ticket sales at my website, kimbabcock.net. You can also go to channelingerik.com and channelingericmediums.com for more information. So don't forget to tune in weekly, guys, to our radio show at liveparanormal.com for Erik's Hour of Enlightenment.
Yeah, and you will see that on the title pages that follow, as well as the tour dates. All right.
Right.
Bye a
Bye.
second time. Bye-bye.
Bye.